But I am so humbled and so thankful that God would choose someone like me to be the pastor of this church. I sit there this morning, I see these beautiful decorations, I see the smile on people's faces, I see the handkerchiefs come out as they wipe away the tears, I see the hands go up in praise to God, and it's hard for me to believe that I am the pastor of this church where God's presence dwells and is shed abroad in the hearts of his people. Because you see, I'm just a nobody. Just a nobody. Some of you have heard this before, but some of you know, my wife especially, how simple I really am. Oh, I look sharp this morning, don't I? I look like I've got degrees after my name and everything. I don't have any. I'm just nobody. I have some brothers who are in the same qualifications that I am. In fact, someone said when the Daniel's children was born, God took one brain and divided it 9 ways and gave us all a part of it. Yet I don't know, but I think you've noticed when the Daniels family is here, there's something about them. Something about it. I recall one time when I wanted to go to a Bible conference in Tennessee and had hardly any money and wrote to ask for a brochure as to where I could stay, and they sent me one. And I was looking at it, and my wife was on the couch reading the paper, and I was looking through this, and I saw the Howard Johnson and the Holiday Inn, and I knew I didn't have the money to stay there. And here it said the James K. Polk Hotel. Friendly atmosphere, reasonable rates. Wasn't a motel, it was a hotel. And I said, Doris, I'm going to call and see if I could stay there. Now, I've told you before, I did go to school, some. I did one time be able to recite the presidents of the United States, but I had long since forgotten that James K. Polk was our 11th president. I had forgotten that, never gave it a thought. Never dawned on my mind, James K. Polk. It never dawned on me that was one of our presidents. Never dawned on me that they had named this hotel after James K. Polk. And I was sitting there, and I dialed the number, and the man picked up the phone and said, "Good evening, James K. Polk Hotel." And I said, "Is this Mr. Polk?" And you say, "Brother Daniel, you didn't do that." You ask my wife. She was sitting on the couch reading the paper, and when I said that, she looked over at me and went, "I'm just a nobody." But friend, I want to tell you, that's one of the qualifications that God can use. And Brother Gary, I'm glad I qualified this morning. One of the funniest things that ever happened to me and my pastorate at Carey Mills was when I decided one day to buy Don and Kenny and Eddie Dillard and Scott and Randy a good gift for Christmas. Something that wasn't just a passing thing, but something would be useful and would be good. And I was in Lowell's over at Marion one day before they went out of business, and they had made a special purchase on these Seiko digital watches, and I still got mine. This was 16, 17 years ago. And I thought, I asked the lady, I said, "Is that the right price on those watches?" She said, "Yes, we purchased a special purchase, and that's just a one-time deal." So I bought us all one. It tells you everything, the day of the week, the month, the time. It's a stopwatch. It does everything. It's got an alarm on it. So I bought them all one and gave it to them. And a couple Sundays later, Don and Eddie was sitting on the front seat, and I was preaching one Sunday morning, and Don's alarm started going off. And it was at such a pitch that Don didn't hear it. But Eddie heard it loud and clear. And Eddie thought it was his watch going off. And he started pushing the buttons trying to get it to stop. And Don looked at him wondering what he was doing, because he couldn't hear nothing. And Eddie said, "Don, I read the instructions on this watch, and it said if the alarm goes off, you can push any button and it'll stop it. And I pushed them all, and it won't stop." And Don said it won't. And he couldn't hear nothing. Well, I heard that, and that was kind of funny. But the next Sunday, Eddie sat back in the congregation with his wife, Wilma, and Don was on the front seat by himself. Doris, my wife, was sitting behind him. I'm preaching away, and Don is engulfed in my sermon, and about 20 after 11, his alarm starts going off. And he doesn't hear it. He's engulfed in my sermon. My wife reaches up and taps him on the shoulder and says, "Don." He said, "What?" She said, "Is that you?" And if you can get that picture in your mind, he's the only one on the front seat. His watch is going off and he can't hear it. And she asked him, "Is that you?" And the quizzical look came over his face, and he looked this way and that way, and he said, "What?" And she said, "Is that you?" And he looked this way and that way a couple more times and looked back at her and said, "Yep, this is me." You see, Don qualifies. Now, I'm going to have my brother Kenny come share something with you that helps to illustrate what I'm trying to say to you this morning. Don's not here this morning, so we can say anything we want to about him. But Ken, come on up if you will, bud. And I want Kenny to share a little incident that happened with him and Don a while back. And I don't want him to leave anything out, because this will help undergird my sermon as to who's qualified for God to use. Get right in the mic.
I never should have told this. Back some time ago, Don had to go down to Paducah periodically at the pain management center. They was trying to help him out with his pain in his side down there, and he was taking spinal injections, and they was having to medicate him and put him out. And he said that he'd be laying there waiting for him to come, and then he'd come to, and he'd think, well, when are they coming? And they'd come in and say, well, okay, Mr. Daniels, it's time to get dressed, and it's all over. And it'd take about 2 hours, and I would sit out in the lobby, and I would get a little drowsy myself. And when they'd bring Don out, you could tell that they had just awakened him, and he was still under sedation, and he'd come out bouncing off the walls and everything. And at the time, Don had a blue 1992 Ford Crown Victoria, blue interior, the whole bit. And we drove down there, and there was always one place that we just liked to park, and we parked right in that same spot every time we went down there. And so this particular day, why we went down there, and that parking place was taken. And so we parked in another place. And so we was in there about 2 hours or so, and when Don finally came out, we just automatically went right back to that place, and there was a blue car sitting there with a blue interior, and I went up, and Don was about half out of it, and I was leading him around the car, and I went around and I tried sticking the key in the switch, and I couldn't get it to open. And I said, well, Don, the door won't open with the key. And he said, well, what's wrong with it? And I said, I don't know. And I went around and tried the right door, and I said, I can't get either one of them to open. And I looked in the car, and I thought, this is it. And so I said, if I could get in it any way at all, I know it'll work, because I know the key will fit the ignition, because I drove it down here. And so then I backed off, and I said, well, what is the code on this electronic entry? And he said, I forgot. I don't even remember it having one. And I thought, well, he's just about unconscious. And I said, well, I've never noticed it before, but I said, it's got electronic entry. And he said, well, boy, that beats me. I don't know what the code is. And so I said, well, if we could get into the trunk, I know the code is in the trunk. So I said, let's try to get in the trunk. So we took the key to went around to get in the trunk, and was looking up here where the key fits, and there was no keyhole there. And I said, well, and he said, it's way down here. He said, I don't remember it being down here. So we fooled around there, and we finally couldn't get in, and I said, well, I don't know. And I guess we spent about 10 minutes there. And pretty soon I walked up, and I kept looking around, and I thought, I just don't know what we're going to do. And pretty soon I looked down and got back in the back and standing there looking, and he said, well, boy, I don't know what to tell you. I am just totally lost, and I am too. And none of this is Don's fault, because Don was totally out of it. And they wouldn't let him come down and even take his treatments without somebody to drive him home. And I finally backed up and looked that thing all over, and all of a sudden on that emblem there, I seen a big M. And it was a 1992 Mercury, blue, the same color inside and out. Everything was identical except it had a Mercury emblem on it instead of a Ford. And I looked around like this, and I saw his Ford. And I said, Don, I think we parked here so long ago we forgot about it. Our car is over there. And he said, I can't believe this. And then we turned around and there was a cab sitting behind where we had been working at, and he had brought somebody down to have them administered to. And I finally turned around and looked at him, and he sat there like Doris did, and he went, and I thought, he's been sitting there for 10 minutes watching us trying to get in this car, and he wouldn't say anything. We laughed, but I'll tell you what, if you can't laugh at yourself, what are you going to do? We drove home, we've had a lot of laughs about that, but we should have kept it to ourselves, but we couldn't.
There's another brother that qualifies.